of the mind.
Okay. I was reminded the other day of the book Anna Karenina. I don't know why, but I've been thinking about it when I was reading and all the emotions that the book can create. And I was thinking about the drama and the tension, suspense, whatever you want to call it, in the book. So, as a writer, the question I kept asking, how do you know when to create that tension, that drama that, really kind of gets people to pull out the emotions? I was just thinking, is it kind of accidental, it just happens, or is it some sort of kind of guidance, etc.? So as a writer, I have a question to you. How do you create that tension and drama in the book?
Well, of course, for any writers listening, they'll get it or they won't get it. It depends on many things, really. It can depend on the character that you're writing about, but obviously, it is done on purpose, and a lot of this sometimes is added in the edit also. So at the moment, I'm writing a book called Jacob. That's the working title. And Jacob is a character that, first of all, I always see the visual picture of the book. So I almost see the book a little bit like a film. And I'm only telling you how I do it, not how everybody does it. So I always see the visual picture of the character, how he looks, and the situation he's in, his character, his personality. So you have to visualize the whole character or the whole scene, the whole picture that you're trying to convey. The reader has to see it. So, for example, this guy Jacob, he starts up in the book, and he's been through a terrible everything for the past 18 months. His whole life has unraveled before him. His marriage has broken down. His wife ran away with a guy that works at the church, not the vicar, but the other guy who looks after the church. He's had a kind of a breakdown. He's lost his business. And he's gone from this really handsome, young-looking guy to this disheveled, smelly, depressed, greasy, unshaven character. And at this point in the book, it's a very, very much a winter's night. And when you look out the window and it's pitch black, but the white snow makes everything look a little bit orange. So the tension starts to build when he is. What was the other thing? You asked me tension and what? Suspense, was it?
Drama, yeah. Tension, drama.
So the drama and the suspense. So the drama begins with this character walking frantically back into in this apartment, and he's above a shop, on a terrace street, a small converted shop with a flat above, and he's going a bit crazy because he's spending too much time on his own. And the whole story of the book is about finding his life again. So the tension is building and the drama is building because the book describes him walking back and forth. Every now and again he stops and puts his hands on his face and he's not sure what he's thinking. And there's a point where he looks out the window and he sees a couple walking by and he says, that's what I want. I want a woman in my life again. I want someone else's flesh against my flesh. I want to feel their breath. I want to feel their heat. So you can feel the tension building all the time. And as he's walking back into this window, and he only has one light, so the tension's built through. I'm just thinking about it now. There's a full description of the apartment and a description of the wingback chair that he sits by at the window. And it's a green wingback chair, but there's a circle of grease where decades of people have sat on this chair and put the head back. So the chair is still green apart from the greasy bit. So it describes that. It describes you can't use the bathroom with the door closed because the door doesn't close. It describes the tap never stops dripping. So you can feel the tension and the anxiety of this young character. But it's done through description. It's done through descriptive narrative, where you can see this young guy and you're thinking, oh my God, because you have to make the reader feel. So the reader's like Anna Karenina, like War and Peace, and other Tolstoy's great writings.
So it's almost like I suppose you're right. So when you're reading kind of a good book, it's just the mental image that you create,
It's the
and it's
imagery.
almost like gives you as a reader like your own. Almost like maybe every reader kind of imagines it a different way, but gives you that mental picture. But it's interesting you said like you can start any book with almost like a drama and tension building up. But obviously there are some books where it's just quite a slow beginning, like even like we were talking about Tolstoy, and I do find, for example, like his beginnings, it's just quite slow. It just really takes you a while. Well, it takes me a while to get into it, and then once you get into it, that's when kind of the speed builds up. So the question, I suppose, it's not even a question. So, but there are, I suppose, no rules. You can start building character from the first word, or
there's no rules when you're writing, because if you read Stephen King's book on writing, the first thing he says is there are no rules, and if there are rules, you have to break them. So there's no rules. I mean, at the moment, I've just started reading Dr. Zhivago, as you know, and it starts off really pacey, but he uses a short staccato style of writing and a very simple style of writing, where it's like 5 to 7 words in a sentence, and it's like bang, full stop, full stop, full stop. And when you read it straight away, I was sucked right in. Where I've read most of Tolstoy's books, and the very first ones I read of his were novellas. So the novellas are short stories, but they're still quite long, 5 to 10,000 words. But even with Tolstoy's novellas, it still takes a little bit of time for the story to take off. But one of them, I forgot the name of the story now. It begins with this guy. He's a shoemaker. I forgot. Do you remember the story? Which story?
I remember the story. I can't remember the title though.
I can't remember the title. He's a shoemaker, and it's the middle of winter, -20, and he's wearing a huge fur coat. And in those days, it wasn't like a fur coat like we wear today. It was just a throw. And as he's walking through the deep snow towards a church, but the way Tolstoy describes it is you can see him walking through the snow, and you can see the hair on this coat blowing, and you can see his blue lips and his very red nose. You can see it when you read it. It's brilliant. And then something catches his eye very slightly behind the church, and you're wondering what he's seen. And as he's walking closer, he sees a piece of someone's skin, and then he sees a man completely naked stood behind the church. So when he does the short stories, you get into it quite quick because it's a short story, it's a novella. But when I read War and Peace, I kept thinking, am I going to actually get into this because it's such a huge book? But there's a point where you can't stop reading.
That is a.
But the genius really is the build-up of the characters and the personality. So the characters and the personality have to be strong enough for you want to follow what they're doing. Because if it's a weak character with a weak personality, you're not going to read any further, especially if you are a slow build writer. Some writers are, where Dr. Zhivago is straight in there. So it depends. So to build that tension, there has to be lots of characteristics. And the main part of the tension is, apart from the descriptive writing, you also have to have something like what I would call pausing. So you have to have pace and you have to have pause. So you can pace a paragraph, then slow it down. So pace a paragraph is like, suddenly something appeared before him, and then it vanished. So you have the pace, and then you have the pause. And that's what creates a tension. But the tension really means is, I'm tense because I don't know what's going to happen next. And then it reveals itself in the next line.
So it's an interesting point, because when you're writing, obviously creating that character, creating the story, So how do you judge? Um, you know, I suppose I'm just thinking, people listening to that. How do you judge? When to kind of pace it up, when to slow it down? Is there some sort of
Everybody's going to be different, but for me, I don't overwork it.
Mhm.
I've usually had to think about the character while I'm out having a coffee. So sometimes I'll get lost in my thoughts thinking, oh God, poor Jacob, what's going to happen to him next? And actually, any writer, good writer, will tell you that when they sit down to write, when it flows, you just can't stop because you know what's happening next. Like the point when Jacob meets his new wife in the coffee shop, as I was writing that, I was just sending Jacob for a coffee.
Mhm.
It's just replicating things I do in my life, really. So I was sending him for a coffee because he was just fed up. And he goes into this coffee shop, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice if somebody sat next to him? And as I was writing it said, and as he was drinking his coffee, you heard the door of the coffee shop open, and this woman with dark hair and full red lips and deep brown eyes slowly walked towards the counter, got her coffee. The coffee shop was busy. The only chair left was one next to Jacob.
Mhm.
And she came over and said, do you mind if I sit next to you? And that was how he met his second wife. But it wasn't something I thought about with the character.
Mhm.
It was just the pace it was going. He was having a slow moment, and I wanted to. What is when you're writing, you don't overthink it. I wasn't thinking I want to pick it up now. I was just thinking it's a perfect moment for this person to appear, because after she appears, he falls in love with her instantly, but he can't find her again after that
Right.
until later on. She finds him.
So that's kind of my next question. You mentioned at the beginning that you do that in the edit. So can you elaborate a little bit as well? So you said, you build the tension, you can build the tension, and then you do that in the edit. So
Well, so
what part does that
sometimes,
play?
well, the edit's critical. It's the bit I hate, as you know,
Mhm.
and I sometimes have things lying around forever because I don't want to do the edit. So the edit is the tough bit, but it's actually the edit is where the power is, really, because you can reread a chapter or a paragraph and realize something's missing. Just there can either be a moment missing, there can be a bit of extra description missing, there can be a character missing, there can be a mention of someone, something missing, something's missing. And when you read it, you go, you know what? Now would be a good point. So I remember doing an edit on Jacob, and when I went back to the edit, I thought now would be a good point for his brother to turn up.
Right.
So I ended up writing a huge bit when his brother turned up, and when his brother turned up, but it wasn't in the first draft.
Mm-hmm.
It was in it was added in the edit, and the same in the edit as well. When you go back to the edit, there's bits in there that are terrible. I mean, I don't know how. I mean, I've got pieces this long.
Yeah.
That have been deleted from Jacob, and I put them into another document as deletions, just in case I need them for now. So the edit is important, and of course, the other thing with an edit is, so sometimes I like my books to start quite fast, my stories to start quite fast. I like them to get in there really quick, and sometimes the beginning, it may not have that suspense, it may not have that tension, it may not have the build-up, it may not have the power of the character. And it's only on the edit when you read it again, you go, I'm going to have to rewrite this.
It's interesting because like some books have some sort of definitive say event building up or character building up where it's almost like the kind of climax of the event, and that's kind of where the most kind of peak of the drama happens, and then from there the story kind of develops further until it finishes. And then you have some stories. I was again writing and reading about it, That was before kids, and when I had time to read more. It was this story which I actually don't even remember what's exactly about it, but it's The Alchemist, Coelho's, and I remember there was nothing really dramatic about the whole book. But the whole point, when I finished reading the book, is just kind of made me feel like, right, I'm gonna just do something completely different in my life. This is the book that I really needed to read at this point. So it's almost like a different way of building drama and character without having like one particular peak. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, it's a different style of book, of course. So if you're writing a book, so like what was it, The Alchemist?
Yeah.
The Alchemist is a great book. It's very simply written, but again, it's a different writer, right? So I'm not a huge. The Alchemist has sold millions, nearly as many as the Bible in some cases, and I'm not a fan of The Alchemist. I've tried to read it, and for me, the Alchemist is the pace is too much the same.
It's a bit soft.
Yeah, it's just a soft, steady pace all the way through. In fact, I've never read it to the end, but it's a soft, steady pace. But some books are designed to do that. Some books are just designed to tell a story the way it is, and there can either be a moral at the end, or there can be a lesson at the end where you say, "Okay, I'm going to do that." And some books do that brilliantly. I mean, I've definitely read books where I think, okay, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to make these changes.
So anybody, writing a book, character developing character. So what would you say that is kind of the most, well, maybe like, the main pointers? I mean, it doesn't have to be 3 points or 5 points, but the main pointers when you're building tension and drama. How would you summarize that? That's the most important thing when you're writing a book in order to create drama, suspense, tension.
I think there's a few things. One, you have to know the characters, depends on many people. You have to know that person. So if you're writing about, I mentioned one of my characters earlier on, Jacob. You have to know Jacob like he's your brother. If you're writing about, because you have to know how he's going to react. You have to know, is he soft or is he tough? You have to know, is he the type that cries at everything? Is he the type that laughs at everything? Does he not? And so on and so on. So you have to know the character. Because if you don't know the character, you can't make the descriptive text develop into tension or suspense or animation or anything. It's not possible. So if you have a main character, you don't have to know too much about your other characters, but you have to know a little bit about them. Like I have characters I write about, but I kind of understand who they are and what their purpose is. But at the same time, I don't know them like I know my main character, Jacob. Because for me, when I'm writing, the book is real. And there's the same with the whole environment. If you place a character in an environment, so if that character is in that particular environment, you have to be able to describe, the cupboard at the far end of the room had one door hanging off because one of the hinges had been broken, and one of the wooden knobs was also missing. You have to be able to describe the peeling paint on the window. You have to be able to describe that out of all the 3 lights in the room, there's only one bulb that works, and so on. So it's all about understanding and describing and having the ability to transplant those words from the book into the reader's mind so the reader can build a picture. And the next thing on top of that is, of course, it has to pace. So, for example, when we took our kids to school this morning, so we dropped our kids off at nursery. It was completely frantic. It's completely mad busy. Then we stopped for a second, and then we walked very gently and quietly over to the coffee shop and had a coffee.
Mhm.
So life naturally has pace. Fast, slow, medium, slow, fast. But if you're writing a very dramatic book, you're going to have a lot of pace moments in there. But you're going to have a lot of dark moments as well. And in the book of Jacob,
Mhm.
the moment when he gets the text that his mother had died, the book slows down so dramatically. And then there's a moment when he finally walks through the snow and reaches his parents' house. And he's standing 200 yards away from the house, just asking himself, shall I go in or shall I not go? So the pace, I hope, works to the point where you know that he's standing still and nothing's being said. He's thinking.
Mhm.
And then eventually he goes in. And when he goes in, there's a bit of a paced up moment because all his family saying, Jacob, glad you, blah, blah, blah. And then it goes down again, where he has to walk up those stairs with his brother one step at a time and go into that bedroom, slowly open the door, and his dead mother is still lying in the bed because they're waiting for the mortician to arrive and the doctor and the hospital and so on, because she's literally just died. So pace is very important, but the suspense around the whole environment is also very important.
Mhm.
For instance, when the mother is described in the bed, it describes the shape of her under the duvet.
Mhm.
So you can see his mother, but she's not really there, she's gone.
The question I have is, how come that book's not written? That it sounds so interesting.
That is true. This is for anyone listening, this is a book that is quite big. It's about 110,000 words. And I've been working on it for a few years now. It's encouraging for writers to know that Boris Pasternak spent 20 years writing Dr. Zhivago. Tolstoy spent 7 years writing War and Peace. And I've been writing that book for quite a long time, maybe 6 years.
Yeah, 5-6 years.
5-6 years, maybe, I'm not sure.
Mm.
But anyway, going back to the suspense and tension, I mean, I'm not really sure what to say to you. You can either feel it
Mhm.
or you can't feel it, but you should never force it.
Right. That's a very good point.